الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد بالقدر العظيم وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. اللهم ألهمنا الصواب بالقول والعمل والحال واجعلنا من أهل التقريب والقرب إليك يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, this is the first of our lessons on the Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya, which is a text typically studied after having studied the Ajrumiyya itself, and ideally after having studied at least one commentary of the Ajrumiyya, and it serves as a bridge between the study of the Ajrumiyya, which is the gateway into Arabic grammar, and the intermediate commentaries of this subject. The purpose of the mutun, of the primers in any subject, is to give the foundational issues related to that subject, so that the person has a clear framework by which to understand the subject at hand. The purpose of the commentaries thereafter is to broaden and deepen one's understanding. So, broadly, the stages of learning are described as being three. There is what's called, Imam al-Ghazali referred to as Haddul Iqtisar, the stage of basic knowledge, right? And this is also called, can be called Marhalat al-Ta'sis, the foundational stage. And there, in each subject, one learns the core basic issues related to that subject that is at hand. So that one has a broad conceptualization of what one is studying. That's the basic stage. Then there is the intermediate stage called Haddul Iqtisad. Iqtisad, the mid-level, the intermediate stage. And that's also often, the first stage is often called Marhalatul Mutun, the stage of the primers. The intermediate stage is often called Marhalatul Shuruh, the stage of the commentaries. Insofar as very often one is studying commentaries now that mention derivative issues, reasoning, and whatever the investigations related to the subject are. And then you have the advanced studies, which is called Haddul Istiqsa by Imam al-Ghazali. Haddul Istiqsa, the deepening or broadening of one's studies, specialization, Marhalat al-Takhassus, in sort of contemporary nomenclature. So the Ajrumiyya is very much an opening primer, and people would often study one or two commentaries because the consolidating the core, the asas, is the most important stage of one's studies. Right? So very often people would study the Ajrumiyya, one, sometimes two commentaries of the Ajrumiyya, to consolidate one's understanding of the core. Students would be encouraged to memorize the Ajrumiyya, but also to know its rulings, be able to distinguish between the things that require distinguishing between, know the nuances, to know things like al-mamnu' min as-sarf, to know things like istithna, exceptions, to know things like the difference between hal and tamyiz, to know the different types of nida, the different types of la, and the many issues that arise across the chapters. Then you go to the stage of the commentaries. In what we can call the Arab curriculum, at the beginning of the intermediate stage has typically been Qatr al-Nada by Ibn Hisham. Has typically been Qatr al-Nada by Ibn Hisham, or Sharh Qatr al-Nada. Ibn Hisham wrote a terse matan called Qatr al-Nada. He commented upon himself, Qatr al-Nada. And then the intermediate stage would cover Qatr al-Nada, Sharh Qatr al-Nada, then Sharh Shudur al-Dhahab, also by Ibn Hisham, and then a brief commentary on the Alfiyya. That constitutes an intermediate stage. And then Mughni al-Labib by Ibn Hisham was either considered the completion of the intermediate stage, and that's what Sajid Lizada, the author of Tartib al-Ulum, says, وَلَا يُسْتَبْعَدْ أن يكون مغني اللبيب لابن هشام من تمام حد الاقتصاد. That's not far-fetched to say that Mughni al-Labib is a completion of the intermediate stage. If one's done that, then beyond that is specialization. So you'd have the foundational stage would have 3 texts in grammar, Ajrumiyya, 1 or 2 commentaries, and then you'd have three texts, possibly 4, in the intermediate stage. And this we're not talking about advanced study. But what many scholars found was there's a gap, a jump between the Ajrumiyya, even with its commentaries, and Sharh Qatr al-Nada, or anything equivalent that would be studied at the intermediate stage. Which is why the author of Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya, Imam al-Khattab, Imam Shams al-Din Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Khattab al-Ra'ini, whose roots go back to Al-Andalus, but who was born in Mecca and lived in Mecca, and he was a Maliki jurist and considered one of the muhaqqiqeen. He's most famous for his works on Maliki fiqh, above all, right? And the most lasting works of influence that he has is a number of great works in Maliki fiqh. Most notably, Mawahib al-Jalil fi Sharh Mukhtasar Khalil. Mukhtasar Khalil is a text that the Maliki school revolves around, and Al-Hattab's commentary on it, called Mawahib al-Jalil fi Sharh Mukhtasar Khalil, is one of the most notable works. And he wrote, he's a great, well-rounded scholar who wrote in many, many subjects. And he died in the year 902. He died in the year 902. And he died in Tarablus, Al-Gharb. Because there are 2 Tarabluses of fame. There's Tarablus, Lebanon, there's Tripoli, Lebanon, and there's Tarablus al-Gharb, which is Tripoli in modern day Libya. So he was born in the year 902. My mistake. He was born in the year 902, and he died in the year 954 after the Hijrah. 954 after the Hijrah. And he wrote in fiqh, he wrote in usul, he wrote in aqa'id, he wrote in grammar, he wrote in tafsir, and he has a number of works that were not complete. Okay, because he had goals to write in many subjects. Interestingly, of the works that are not complete, that are mentioned in several biographies of it, he commented upon 3/4 of the Ihya, 3 of the 4 quarters, but it's neither published, it was not complete, but it's not published. And what are the reasons they say why he might not have completed it? Hopefully it's because he died in the year 954, aged 52. For some of the biographers, including the edition that we're using, he puts that he died in the year 954, which other biographers can confirm as well. It says one of his works, it is said he finished it in the year 965. Most people, we know by the hadith of the Prophet, if the human being dies, the actions end. It's highly unlikely that both numbers are correct, which is what it is. Now, so he'll tell us in the introduction why he wrote the Ajrumiyya. The idea is to be a bridge from the Mutammima, tammama, yutammimu, right? فهي متممة, right? Is the fa'ala pattern to complete something. Tamam is completion. Tammama is to engage in completing something, is the active completing of something. So there are, in order to reach the intermediate level works, there are grammatical issues that you need to have clear. Some of these are found through the study of the commentaries of the Ajrumiyya, but they're sort of scattered. And to hit the intermediate stage, where the beginning stage is to know the core issues. The intermediate stage is to understand reasoning, detail, application, difference of opinion. Okay. These aspects, right, to know, to understand the reasoning, the detail, the application, examples, application, i'rab. And when you get to i'rab, the real test of i'rab is to apply it to classical poetry and the differences, because the Arabs had dialects, so there's multiple usages. So how do you focus on getting the maqasid, the aims of the intermediate stage, when you're still struggling with the rules themselves? Okay. So the hope is that someone who comes to the Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya class, they know the Ajrumiyya well. The Ajrumiyya, its definitions and its application, and those testing areas of the Ajrumiyya, like some of the things that we mentioned. So this work is meant to be a bridge, that what issues do you need to know to complete and consolidate your foundational grammatical studies in order to be ready to enter the intermediate stage as a truly intermediate student. So you're not trying to learn your grammar on the fly in the intermediate stage. So you get, and having, alhamdulillah, I got to read this text, the Mutammima, over 6 or 7 weeks. We were doing it like 6 days a week, sometimes 7, with Shaykh Farza, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala, in Mukhayyam, Palestine, on the outskirts of Damascus. It was part of the greater Damascus area, but now it's been shelled to smithereens. But at the same time, I was doing Sharh Qatr al-Nada with Shaykh Abdul Halim Abu Sha'r of Maidan, of the area of Maidan in Damascus, Maidan Mansour. And every grammatical issue that is mentioned in Sharh Qatr al-Nada, the issue itself is found without its discussions in Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya. So this gives one a firm foundation if consolidated. How do you benefit from this text? Well, first is, of course, use this text to review and consolidate everything you've done before. Okay? So concurrently, review what you've done before. The Ajrumiyya, any commentary you've done on the Ajrumiyya here, we covered the Tuhfa Saniyya, review those. Okay? And stay focused. Some people have asked, what about Hidayat and Nahu and this, that? Those are completely different traditions of teaching grammar. Focus. There's an internal consistency and logic here. If you stay within it, this is one stream of grammatical study. And so consolidate those things. Write out the method of the Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya in a logical manner. If you don't follow a method of note-taking, learn a method. One such method we can recommend, just as an example, is the Cornell method. But write out the method logically, space it out, leave wide margins, break things down very clearly, and with that, diagram the whole thing. But identify particularly what is extra in Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya. What is extra in Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya over the Ajrumiyya. Some of the extras are essential. Those you would do well to annotate the previous texts that you studied, whether it be the Ajrumiyya or the commentary on the Ajrumiyya, the things that are essential, add them there. Okay? So you annotate. So for example, if something is essential, we'll see some examples. In the Ajrumiyya, it doesn't give a definition of what is bina. That's very useful to know. You might want to add it there. When he talks about what are the signs of one of the most important signs of the ism is al-isnad ilayhi. That's something useful to mention there. So some of these things are quite useful in that sense. So those are the three key things. Write out the method. Number 2, diagram it. Number 3, review what you've done before and add from this text the key things back in that text. So you sort of as you're traveling with this text, what you've studied before is accompanying you. That's the most important thing. You consolidate. And you'll notice that there's things in the Tuhfa Saniyya that are not here. So those can help inform your study here. Now, along with that, Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya is blessed as a text to have two highly beneficial commentaries upon it. The commentary that we're encouraging you to accompany your reading of this text with is the commentary of al-Fakihi. Okay. Imam Abdullah ibn Ahmad al-Fakihi, famous as Jamal al-Din Ahmad ibn Ali, Jamal al-Din Abdullah ibn Ahmad ibn Ali al-Fakihi. Jamal al-Din Abdullah ibn Ahmad ibn Ali al-Fakihi. He too was a Meccan scholar. And very interestingly, he was actually born before Al-Hattab. Because Al-Fakihi was born in the year 899, so 3 years before Al-Hattab. And his mother was an Abyssinian slave. Okay. And it's mentioned in the commentary in our edition that he attended Al-Azhar for a time, and he attended the Sharh of Qatr al-Nada with some of the Mashayikh there. And if they found some parts of it tricky, they would refer to him in the class. Right? Right? Because he himself had written a commentary on Qatr al-Nada. Right? And he is above all famous for his specialization in the science of Arabic grammar. He died in the year 972 after the Hijrah in Mecca. And his most famous works are all related to grammar. So, probably his most famous work is his own commentary on Qatr al-Nada of Ibn Hisham. It's called Mujib al-Nida fi Sharh Qatr al-Nada. And he was only 18 when he authored it. Many have deemed the Sharh al-Fakihi to be superior to the Sharh of Ibn Hisham. And of course, there's beautiful, it's a really beautiful commentary. It's more brief, it is more focused on the grammatical reasoning, and has its benefits. It has a great hashia on it by Yasin, Allama Yasin. He also wrote a commentary on the Ajrumiyya. He wrote a very unique work called al-Hudud al-Nahwiyya, the grammatical definitions. Right? And he wrote a commentary on it, because many of the terms of grammar are tricky to define. Okay, so he took on that challenge in just coming up with the core definitions of grammar. A number of other people did similarly, amongst them Ibn Kamal Basha, etc. Of course, all the great commentaries define, come up with definitions of the core concepts, but that's a useful work. There's an influential book by al-Hariri called Mulhatul I'rab, which has been frequently studied across the Muslim world. It was very common in Hadramaut in the classical times. A number of the great ulama of Hadramaut wrote commentaries on it, and then elsewhere as well. And Mawlana al-Fakihi wrote a commentary on it as well, called Kashf al-Niqab an Mukhaddarati Mulhat al-I'rab. And he wrote this commentary upon Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya, al-Fawakih al-Janiyya, right? The ripe fruit, right? And this is meant to be a clear commentary, right? He actually refers to it in the opening as هذا تعليق لطيف. So this commentary on his commentary on the Mutammima, he refers to it هذا تعليق لطيف. These are latif. These are small, light comments that I have placed upon the Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya. And of course, very interestingly, he refers to al-Hattab as لِسَيِّدِنَا وَصَاحِبِنَا, our master and our companion, because they were contemporaries. Actually, al-Fakihi is 3 years older than him, okay? And he praises him highly. And he says, he tries to clarify its meanings, okay? With important fawaid, with important points of benefit, right? So this is on the briefer side of commentary, right? It's meant to clarify and give points of benefit. There is another commentary which is significantly larger, probably twice or 3 times the size, which is the commentary of Allama Muhammad ibn Ahmad al-Ahdal, who was a distinguished scholar of the 13th century, right? And there's some discussion about exactly when he died, but the predominant position is he died in the year 1298. Right? And his commentary is called al-Kawakib al-Durriyya, Shaykh al-Ajrumiyya, and this commentary is a lot more detailed, right? So it has a lot more grammatical material. He unpacks the issues with a lot of detail. It is not recommended for the student trying to understand the text because the detail can be overwhelming. The extent of the detail in this text is frequently much more than you will find in a mid-sized commentary on the Alfiyya. So it's packed, it's dense, it's rich. But it is useful for the student knowledge for a number of reasons. Amongst them, there are areas where you need extra detail, and we'll be pointing to useful extra details here and there. So use it selectively. It's also very useful because we left mention of a fourth aspect of how to benefit from Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya, and this is really unique to Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya. And if you want to complete your benefit in the study of the Mutammima, this is critical. Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya has roughly 150, so it said, I'm not given to things like counting, but has 150 Quranic examples. So the intermediate commentaries focus their examples on poetry examples. So that's the battleground of Arabic. Okay? And a lot of the examples they give is for the disputed issues. Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya gives examples for the rules themselves. Its primary focus is to give examples to the rules mentioned from the Quran. So there's 150 Quranic examples. I would urge you to keep a separate daftar, like a separate notebook, on the i'rab of those Quranic examples, and to try to make i'rab of all of them. Try to make i'rab of all of them. And for that, the Qawaid al-Durriya is very useful because it does i'rab of all those examples. It does i'rab of all those examples. So you can self-test. It's also good tafsir practice because he also gives a little bit of, he explains out the verse here and there, but the key thing is that he does i'rab. So that's the Kawakib. The Kawakib can really be overwhelming, so I can't, but it's full of points of benefit, right? Like really, from beginning to end, it has a lot of really beneficial things, but it can tire one out. And one of the, just to mention a fa'ida, one of the things that the Shaykh mentioned when I was in Damascus was that key points of benefit that you find, keep an index of the key points of benefit. Not of just the general issues, but I have several columns of things that you find in the Qawaid al-Durriya that you don't find, that are rare and useful points of benefit. When I went through the text. So that's just a little bit of background about the Mutammima, how to, why it's placed there as a bridge between the foundational books and the intermediate books. Consolidating this would give one a very solid foundation. Like all the grammar you need to know, just to know the rules of grammar, is here in Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya. But there's a lot more to the study of Arabic grammar. So particularly the reasoning, etc. And then we look just briefly at, it's important to know who the author is of the Mutammima, Imam al-Hattab al-Raimi, and the two great commentators on it. There are some contemporary other works on it, etc. We don't need to get into the details related to that. And of course, the interesting point that al-Fatihi was a contemporary and a companion of al-Hattab. So, and then much later, in the 13th century Hijri, you have al-Qawaid al-Durriya authored as an extensive commentary. So we're going to be starting bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Any questions that work for you? start the text بإذن الله تعالى. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال الإمام العلامة الحطاب المالكي رحمه الله تعالى في متممة الأجرمية. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So this is the standard opening, okay, for the reasons that have been mentioned, and we won't expand on its meanings, but there's a couple of points that are mentioned by al-Faqih that bear mention. Right? So when he says Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, okay, that the Alhamdulillah is what's called a Jumla Khabariyya, right? It itself, it's making a statement. Right? It's a statement. Praise belongs to Allah, but it is there to. So it is an affirmation, but you are making a statement, because what is intended by that is to affirm the praises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you're not simply stating that praise belongs to Allah. Okay? You're not stating the fact, you are affirming it. There's the difference between stating something and affirming it. So that's one, this jumla is khabariyatun lafzan insha'iyya ma'na, right? Because what you are doing is you are affirming the praises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Not simply making a statement of fact. And here he says was-salatu was-salam. And you can say, and peace and blessings and peace belong to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? You could say, you could send peace and blessings upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with a jumla ismiya or a jumla fi'liya. So al-Faqih says وآثر الجملة الاسمية على الفعلية لدلالتها على الدوام والثبات. He stated the salah and salam with a jumla fi'liya, الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد. Okay? So this is jumla ismiya to indicate continuity. Right? That, because if you say I praise, this is one temporal, time-limited action. But it belongs to him. Why? Because Allah has praised him in eternity. And number two, he deserves it. Okay? Rabbil Alameen. The Rabb, amongst its most important meaning, is Malik, is the master or owner, right? And it has many other meanings as well. He doesn't. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين. Okay. The core meaning of salam is tahiyya, is the greeting of honor. Right? على سيدنا محمد. Sayyid, right, comes from من ساد قومه يسودهم فهو سيد. Okay? And he mentions that ascribing siyada to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is permitted without dislike. Okay? Whether you use the L or not. Okay? some people quote a hadith that saying that don't call me master, la tusayyiduni. That one is broken Arabic, and number two, it is a fabricated hadith. It's not actually a hadith. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ana sayyidu waladi Adam wa la fakhr." I am the master of the children of Adam, and that's not a boast, right? And he said regarding Sayyidina Sa'ad, "Qumu li sayyidikum," stand for your master, and many other examples. Prophets in the Quran are sayyidan wa hasura, a master. وعلى آله, right? And here al, there's some linguistic discussion of what al comes from, etc., and there's difference of opinion regarding it and so on. But one important thing is that when we praise, when we make dua, al refers to all the followers of the Prophet ﷺ, right? Now, they state that al is only used for the noble. Either those lil ashraf, either those who are actually noble or who are imagined to be noble, the notables, and those worthy of estimation. Whereas ahl can be used for both the notables and for others. وصحبه, right? And he gives a definition of sahab is ism jama' of sahib, and a sahabi, right, is they give, in fact he gives a definition. It's not directly related to our subject, but because they're of the most notable of creation, it's good to know. Right? He gives a good definition that the sahabi is man ijtama'a mu'minan bin Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A sahabi is someone who met with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, believing in him, even if the meeting was a moment, and who died a believer, even if he did not see the Prophet ﷺ, whether due to blindness or because, for example, in the case of some women, they're behind a barrier, or because of the large size of the crowd, right? He was at the back, but he was present with the Prophet ﷺ physically. And even if they did not relate a single hadith, there are many people we know to be companions, they did not relate any hadith. Right? Ajma'in, all of them. Okay? And this is to emphasize, what they put Ajma'in, to emphasize the madhab of Ahl Sunnah, the distinguishing hallmark of Ahl Sunnah, which is that we have belief, love, and veneration for all the companions of the Prophet. Okay? Then he says, وَبَعْدْ, to proceed. Okay? And this is from the Fasl al-Khitab. It said that this is granted to, this is what's meant when Allah says that Sayyidina Dawud was doing Fasl al-Khitab, distinguishing speech. It refers to saying Amma Ba'd. And the basis of it is Amma Ba'd, but frequently people abbreviate it to Wa Ba'd. And you can see the explanation of Amma Ba'd in, if you wish, in al-Ajrumiyya. So he says, فَهَذِهِ مقدمة في علم العربية. Okay? This is an introductory work in the science of Arabic. Now, هذه, there's an issue with هذه. هذا and هذه, because what is هذا and هذه?
هذا اسم الإشارة. اسم الإشارة.
Yeah, it's an ism ishara. Now the asl in the ism ishara is yusharu, what you point to? The tangible things. What are you pointing to? Particularly when you're in the beginning of the book. So of course the scholars talk about when was this written? So some said that this was probably written afterward, that you've already done something and you're pointing to what you've done. But the basis is that you write the introduction before you write the rest of the book. So what are you pointing to? You see the issue? You point to something tangible. So either you wrote the book and then you wrote the introduction after and say, فَهَذَا كِتَابٌ أَلَّفْتُ, so you put the reasoning afterwards. That's possible. But that's khilaf al-zahir. The assumption is that something's written, the beginning is written before the middle, and the middle is written before the end. Reasonable assumption. Then how do we understand it? Right? So he tells us, right? If we look at Imam al-Fakihi, he answers this implicit objection. فهذه إشارة إلى محسوس, he is pointing to something tangible. إن تأخرت الخطبة عن فراغ المقدمة, that he's pointing to something tangible if he wrote the muqaddimah after completing the book. أو إلى معقول إن تقدمت عليه, or to something, in his, rationally observed. It's as if you make istihdar of these meanings. This that I'm about to put to paper, this is such and such, right? Right? So that's why. So that's just a subtle point. The hada, right? And this comes up. So the hada is sometimes used for meaning, right? And even in the opening of the Quran, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابِ, it points to something that's distant or elevated. You're starting your address. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ, which book? Right? It's as if it's conceptually present, right? It's coming. It also creates, it conveys rhetorically a sense of anticipation. You say, this, what is it? Right? So it has rhetorical purposes as well. Anyways, muqaddimatun, right? Muqaddima is an ism fa'il. Okay? Min qaddama. Right? 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 And so muqaddima is used for an introductory work because لأنها تتقدم is to bring something forward, right? So as if the main works come later, the muqaddima is what comes first, right? Is what comes first, right? Right? So in fact he says لأن معرفتها تجعل الشارع في علم النحو على بصيرة, because knowing this introductory work لأن معرفتها تجعل الشارع في علم النحو على بصيرة, gives them insight regarding the subject, right? فهي تقدمه على أقرانه, but the muqaddimah also has another aspect, that the one who knows this gets ahead of others. Right? Now, muqaddimah does not necessarily mean that it's brief. Because you can have a brief introductory work, you can have a detailed introductory work. Right? Just as the word mukhtasar means a summary work, but it doesn't have to be a brief summary. That's an error in thinking. And people make mistake with this when we talk about, for example, Nur al-Idah. And there's a tradition of, a matan, sometimes called just a matan, sometimes called a mukhtasar, right? Because a mukhtasar, because it has taqleel al-ma'an, al-mabna. You reduce the size of it. So you take out external discussions and differences and reasoning and so on. But whether it's a mukhtasar, a summary work, or you have a muqaddimah, an introductory work, any of them could be brief, intermediate, or advanced. So, for example, since the author of the Mutammima is a Maliki, a great late Maliki scholar, Imam Ibn Arafah, rahimahullah, he has a work called al-Mukhtasar al-Kalami. He has a Mukhtasar al-Usul, he has a Mukhtasar al-Fiqh, and he has a Mukhtasar al-Ilm al-Kalam in theology. How long do you think his Mukhtasar is? Just any random guess.
1,000 pages.
It's over 1,000 pages. So a Mukhtasar does not mean it's a short work. A Mukhtasar means that which it's a summarized work, right? But it could be a detailed summarization, right? So that is something to keep in mind. هذه مقدمة في علم العربية, in the science of Arabic, right? And here علم العربية, right? علوم العربية are many. And علوم العربية are many. In the science of Arabic, the علوم العربية are many. The core sciences of Arabic are 3. The core sciences of Arabic are 3. Nahu, Sarf, Balagha. The science of Nahu, whose focal point is I'rab, is the endings of words. Sarf, which looks at the structures of words. And Balagha, the rhetoric, which is the eloquent usage of words and expressions. Okay? Those are the 3 core sciences. But, so the core sciences of Arabic are 3. In detail, they mention that there are 12 main sciences of Arabic. If you include the derivative sciences, you can see the list in Grammatical Issues. So, but why would he call? So, what science is the Mutammima written in? In Nahu. So, why would he refer to Nahu as Ilm al-Arabiyya? Right, so, what's meant by it is Ilm al-Nahu, the science of Nahu, as Imam al-Faqih explains, because it is the core science of the Arabic language. In that sarf, you can't do much with sarf, because what do you communicate with? You can communicate in sound sentences, right? So, what is the basis of sound sentences? Nahu. Sarf, in that sense, is almost like a condition for Nahu. In that to have sound sentences, the words making them up need to be sound. So Nahu is built on sarf, but sarf is almost like a condition for it. Right? In that you have a whole bunch of good words. Zayd yajlisu al-tawila. But you say al-tawila yajlisu ala Zayd. Right? You say al-tawila yajlisi ala Zaydan. Right? You'd be totally confused. Would that make sense? No. You have to do some investigation of what went wrong here. So, but if the sentence is sound, then the presumption is that you got your sarf right. Okay? It's like if the prayer is valid, it means you fulfilled the conditions. Okay? So, in that sense, sarf resembles a condition for nahu. And then balagha, eloquence, only arises in the context of sound sentences, typically. Because you can only be eloquent if you're, you know. So in that sense, if you think about like deen, right? It's almost like sarf is like tahara, nahu is like salah, and balagha is like tasawwuf, right? It's eloquence. In some sense, right? This as an approximation. That's the perfection of your speech. To speak rhetorically. But you can't perfect your speech without the other things. So anyways, it's the most needed of the Arabic sciences, right? More than that, Al-Ahdan in al-Ajrumiyya, he says that وَهُوَ أَنْفَعُ عُلُومِ الْعَرَبِيَّة. Right? The Nahu is the most beneficial of the sciences of the Arabic language. إِذْ بِهِ تُدْرَكُ جَمِيعًا. Because through Nahu, all the other sciences of the Arabic are attained. Because to speak, to have sound sentences, you need sound words, so sarf gets taken care of. And to be eloquent, you need sound sentences. So balagha is built upon sound nahu. And because of that, he says, وَمِن ثَمَّ قَالَ السُّيُوطِي إِنَّ الْعُلُومَ كُلَّهَا مُفْتَقِرَةٌ إِلَيْهِ. And that's why all the sciences are in need of nahu. That's why some ulama called it miftahul ulum. Called grammar the key to all sciences. If you don't understand sound sentences, then you're at loss when it comes to Arabic, especially eloquent Arabic, precise Arabic, okay, which is the nature of classical Arabic. So this is the ilm al-Arabiyya. Now Arab, the word Arab is very important, right? So the Imam al-Fatihi here focuses on giving the contextual meaning. Al-Fatihi in his commentary tells us what is nahu. Nahu is al-qasd. Right? Nahu is to go in a certain way. And to go in a certain way presupposes you have a goal in mind. The word qasd has a sense of goal and direction. Okay? And he gives us a definition of nahu, right? العلم بأصول يعرف بها أحوال أواخر الكلم إعرابا وبناء. It's knowledge of principles by which one knows the states of the ends of words in terms of i'rab and bina, right? And he gives what's the aim of this subject, right? Just to seek assistance in understanding the speech of Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And his benefit is to distinguish between sound speech and erroneous speech, right? And he quotes the incident of Sayyidina Ali bin Abi Talib with Abu Asad al-Du'ali, and we'll leave it there. Here in al-Kawakib al-Durriya, he mentions, of course, a number of other useful points. One thing that, of course, remains hanging is why is Arabic called Arabic? Right? Arab. Right? And that's very interesting. And I inquire because أعرب يعرب is to express oneself. Right? It's expression. So it's very interesting. The Arabs were known for the name for the Arabs are those who express themselves. It's fascinating. Okay? Okay. But the same root has a sense of that which is seemingly or beautiful. Right? Right? So a beautiful young woman would be called, in the Quran, this term is used, Uruban Atraba. Right? The beautiful, yes, those whose, those who are seemingly and beautiful. Okay? And that metaphor is used in, it's used in the Quran in that sense. Uruban Atraba, the Ashabil Yamin. Okay? Surah Al-Waqi'ah. But it's used in classical poetry as well about the beauty of the متى يا عريب الحي عيني تراكم. Right? When, oh dear, beautiful one of that desired neighborhood, will my eyes come to see you. Right? وأسمع من تلك الديار نداكم. From that neighborhood, I hear your call. ويجمعنا الدهر الذي حال بيننا. And time gather us as it separated us. ويحظى بكم قلبي. And my heart have you. وعيني تراكم. And my eyes get to behold you. Okay? So anyways, so Arab has this meaning of expression, of that which is seemingly and that which is beautiful. Okay? And has other, but also it's used also for this, that which is expressed in a broader sense. So you say the camel expressed itself, meaning it defecated. Okay? أعرب البعير عما في بطنه. It expressed itself, in a messy kind of way. So anyways, that's a little bit there. متممة لمسائل الأجرومية. Right? Completing the issues of the Ajrumiyya. Right? Completing the issues of the Ajrumiyya. Right? The Ajrumiyya of Ibn al-Ajrum. Right? And the work will be called al-Ajrumiyya as a nisbah to the author. Even though that sometimes people get known by what they used to teach. Sometimes books are given the name of the author. Al-Ajrumiyya, Ibn al-Ajrum's book. His name is Muhammad bin Dawood al-Sinhaji. Right? And they say it's a Berber word. Now just be aware, in our times, there's been a reaction to using the term Berber or Berber to refer to Berbers, right? And you can figure that one out yourself. But the ulama use this term classically for the non-Arab tribal peoples of the various parts of North Africa, right? And it can be used respectfully and it can be used disrespectfully. So So it's not inherently disrespectful. And been used for centuries. So now يعني العرف الطارئ لا ينافي العرف السابق. A new norm does not wipe away past norms. Okay? And where the past norm was sound, we cannot criticize it. Where it's unsound, in that context, then you can be critical of it. Right? But don't get swept away with folly, but just good to be aware of that. Of course, it's an Arabized word, al-Ajrumiyya. So there's a number of ways one can Arabize it. Ajrum. There's a number of ways it can be done, so you can see, right? But the most prevalent, as Allama al-Ahdal says, is فتح الهمزة وإسكان الجيم and right? And they say, and he has a useful principle there. He says, لأن الاسم الأعجمي قد يتعسر النطق به, because foreign words may be difficult to pronounce by Arabs or according to the patterns of the Arabic language. فيتوسع فيه ما لا يتوسع في الاسم العربي. So non-Arab names may be difficult to pronounce. So there may be expansiveness in how you pronounce it in Arabic in ways that would not be allowed for an Arabic word. Okay? So like Khalid, it's an Arabic word. You can't say Khalid. Khalud, right? Like it's, there's a way to pronounce it. But, for example, how do you Arabize Isfahan? Right? Bunch of ways. Gaylan. Well, actually, it's Jilan. Right? So is it G? How do you put that in Arabic? There are at least 6 main ways. Gaylani, Gilani, Kaylani, Kilani, Jaylani, Jilani, Jili, and some decide to try to put in the Arabic, the ga, the Gaylani, Gilani. There's like loads of different ways. That's just a principle, right? And there's even difference when Ibn al-Ajrum was born and died, and the author of the Kawakib says that the author of the Ajrumiyya was born in the year 672 and died in the year 723 in Fas, 723. Right? So it would be so he says then, why did he write this? تكون واسطة بينها وبين غيرها من المطولات. It would be a wasita, an intermediary between the Ajrumiyya and other works of the longer works in the madhab. And al-mutawwalat, generally have mukhtasarat. You have books that are mukhtasar, kutub that are mutawassit, and then you have mutawwal, longer works. So that will be a means between it and and particularly as a bridge, as we mentioned, to Shaykh al-Nada, al-Ahdal mentioned what are some of the most beneficial books of Arabic you can find under where he says al-Mutawwalat. That's of the most beneficial books of Arabic are the commentaries on the Alfiyya. But that's ahead of our time. If someone wants to get a couple of books ahead, right now you find benefit in what you have in Fakihi, plus we'll be referring throughout the lessons to al-Durriyya. Doesn't hurt to have it. We'll be pointing out some useful points. The Alfiyya is a little ahead of ourselves right now. Doesn't hurt to have one commentary on the Alfiyya, just to demarcate the territory, and it's coming down the road. It doesn't hurt. But Sharh Qatr al-Nada is very useful. Sharh Qatr al-Nada is very useful. And Sharh Shulul al-Dhahab is a unique work, much neglected in our times, sadly. But it has its. And he mentions other works that are of great benefit. And he says of the most beneficial and deep works of grammar is Mughni al-Labib, the sufficiency for the smart, of Ibn Hisham, but that presupposes that you know your grammar thoroughly. So it's like a rounding out of grammar. So anyways, so it will be تكون واسطة بينها وبين غيرها من المطولات. Okay? Because of what it adds of fawaid, of points of benefit, above and beyond the Ajrumiyya. Then the author makes dua. Says, نفع الله بها. May Allah benefit by it كما نفع بأصلها في الحياة وبعد الممات. Ameen. Right? As he benefited by its origin, meaning the Ajrumiyya في الحياة, in life, right? By paying attention to it in one's speech, in benefiting by conveying it to others so that they can benefit, for it in this life to be a means to attaining beneficial knowledge, right? And the tangible benefits of Arabic, which are not just worldly in this life, in our religious affairs as well. And more importantly, في الحياة وبعد الممات, and in the hereafter, by reward and closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? إِنَّهُ قَرِيبٌ مُجِيبُ الدَّعَوَاتِ. Indeed, He is close and answers supplications. إِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. If my servants ask you regarding me, I am indeed near. Right? أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِي إِذَا دَعَانِ. I answer the call. Those who call upon me when they call. Okay? أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ. Okay? And He answers supplications. Okay? And then he begins by telling us about kalam, speech. So we're going to stop there because this is meant to be an introductory lesson. He will begin by telling us about speech. Why? Because i'rab arises in the context of sentences. Okay? Of course, one annoying thing about the edition that we have is that it's not paragraphed properly. Right? When it says إِنَّهُ سَمِيعٌ مُجِيبُ الدَّعَوَاتِ, then when it says وَعْلَمْ, this should be the beginning of the next section. And you should put sections in a book. Right? Right? So that it's way off in that sense. Right? So it does not infuse a lot of, but you need to sort of put subheadings yourself in the margins, right? Right? Because the pagination is really strange, right? It's like whoever put the typography of the book was the wrong person. Okay? Like, why would you put al-kalamu huwa and then a section mark? And then, so it's, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive the guy in that. So but most of the copies are like this in different degrees of mediocrity. So we're going to continue from kalam. We ask Allah for best of speech. Any questions?
So you mentioned the Mutammima is comprehensive in terms of the points of grammar that it addresses. Is that the Mutammima on its own, or
Yeah.
So even the flag is like the extra definition?
Yeah, so what I would put the focus on those four things that we emphasize, right? What were they? Write out the text.
Annotate.
Write out the text, diagram it. Take your preparation for this text to go back to review what you've taken before. Annotate what you've taken before with this, but also you'll find, particularly in the Tuhfa Saniyya, there's a lot of points of benefit. So add them here, right, in the appropriate places. So that consolidates between the various things that you've studied. So those are the three core things. The fourth is very important. Do i'rab of all the examples written. Keep the i'rab separate from the notes, right? And that's one of the areas where the Fawaqih al-Janiyya is particularly important. I'll be pointing out useful things in the commentary, and the things I do point out from the commentary, highlight those and include the critical things there in your notes, so they're beneficial points. Particularly, both commentaries have some excellent definitions and so on. There's other things that I'll mention that these are details. Those you catch later. Those are like nawafil. Right? Those are nawafil. And there's many of those in the Kawakib particularly. Any questions? وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين.